We begin with the fatal shooting in Minneapolis by an ICE agent, followed by angry words from the mayor of Minneapolis. So angry, we have to censor part of it.
And I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the fuck out of Minneapolis.
I guess we didn't censor it. His message after ICE agents shot and killed a woman, as you might expect, we're going to be hearing two versions of the shooting. Our correspondent is at the scene where chaos and tensions are simmering. Also had U.S. forces have taken control of not just one, but two foreign oil tankers. One was in the Atlantic Ocean with a Russian flag, the other in the Caribbean. Both are linked to, you guessed it, Venezuela. So where are the ships with all that oil going next? And who might be really angry that the United States took those ships? Plus, our outrage of the day involving a police chief and some missing money. Hear what the top cop in Connecticut admitted to doing. And a big announcement from the Trump administration about what you should eat. Health Secretary RFK Jr. with these words.
We are ending the war on saturated fats. Diets rich in vegetables and fruits reduce disease risk more effectively than many drugs. My message is clear: eat real food.
We will get to that story, but first, we are following the breaking news out of Minnesota. This morning, around 10:30 a.m. local time, a fatal shooting occurred in South Minneapolis. Correspondent Joe Moeller is on the scene in Minneapolis with the very latest. Joe?
That's right. We're here in Minneapolis, just south of downtown, where this all took place earlier today. You can see this video. This is the crowd that was forming when those barricades were set up. We are just south of downtown. This area, I'll give you a live look at the protest that is still happening here. Bear with us. We're using a phone during this live shot, so it's a little bouncy, but I'll go ahead and zoom in. There's still a crowd here. They're gathering around the area where this shooting took place. You can see someone over there with a flag. The intersection here is where it was all closed off. The protest took place earlier, but there was a shooting involving an ICE agent. According to DHS, this all unfolded during an enforcement operation, immigration operation that was taking place. And the person who was shot was someone attempting to, according to DHS, hit that agent that was conducting this operation. There is video of that incident circulating online showing an agent in front of the vehicle and then shots being fired. This operation is happening because, according to DHS, they're conducting the largest immigration enforcement operation they've ever done here in Minneapolis. 2,000 agents are set to be here for this from Border Patrol, ICE, and also HSI. So this yesterday there was Secretary Kristi Noem here talking about this operation. Since Monday, there's been 150 arrests, but until today, we didn't really see many protests. This protest got pretty big, a few hundred people. There was tear gas dispersed a short time after this all unfolded. There were agents being yelled at. The agents were being blocked from leaving the intersection where this investigation was happening. I think we have that video as well showing the intense moments right after this investigation started. You can see here's that video. You can see them dispersing that tear gas into several people because, I mean, these agents were being hit with big blocks of snow, but it's not as cold, so it's sort of heavy pieces of snow and ice being thrown at the agents who were trying to leave. And you can see they were dispersing that tear gas. And even one person brought out an American flag and actually lit it on fire here outside of the barricade that was all set up. But the investigation does continue. We've been hearing from the mayor and the governor earlier today, talking about ICE not wanting to have them here. And also, I do want to mention, just yesterday, there was a press conference with the police chief. He has expressed his concerns regarding this operation here in Minneapolis after watching what's unfolded in other cities. I know that many of these agents have come from other operations, including that one in New Orleans that took place not too long ago. I know Bavino came from New Orleans, from Border Patrol official, that he's been making headlines, especially in Chicago. He is here. He was out here earlier, according to reports. So this investigation will continue. The president just made a comment about it a short time ago, mentioning that the agent his life was in danger during this shooting. But we will be out here covering the very latest. Here's another live look at the scene. Again, one person is dead after an ICE agent did open fire here in Minneapolis. This street where this is taking place is closed, and people say they will be out here throughout the evening to protest. Greta, I'll send it back to you.
Joe Moeller at the scene of the shooting earlier today. Thank you. Former Minnesota Congressman and former presidential candidate Dean Phillips joins me. Good afternoon, sir. And I guess
Good afternoon.
as I look at all this, you know, what I mean, it's terrible loss of life and terrible for the ICE agent, and I mean, there's no big winner in this. But I must admit, with everyone coming out and firing insults back and forth and tweets back and forth, when we have not seen all the videos from every direction, we actually have very little information. And you know, and I just think that everybody on both sides of this are, you know, people are picking sides and picking facts, and I don't know where they get them, other than that we have a tragedy on our hands.
I'm glad you said that, Greta, because it's true, both sides. And we find ourselves in a really precarious time in American history. I was 1 year old when the Kent State episode happened. And it seems for my generation that we may be entering that time again with great national division, when our own uniformed agents are forced to take up arms against American citizens or those who are undocumented. And I have to say, there's a way to do this. Uphold the law, deport those who are undocumented in a little bit more humane way that protects American citizens. Because, Greta, this is inevitable. It's not the last time this will happen, and it's heartbreaking. And I'll just one more comment. Barack Obama, in his 8 years, deported 3 million undocumented people, 3 million. But he didn't do it by sending thousands of uniformed agents into communities, putting their lives at risk, along with bystanders, American citizens, and other human beings. And I just wish we could show a little compassion for both the ICE agents and those who are suffering because these families are deeply, deeply scared right now.
But I also back it up a little bit further, is that a lot of these host communities that, you know, in common communities that are a different party than President Trump are, you know, right from the get-go throwing, you know, fuel on the fires, talking about how they don't want them, the people don't want them. We're not quite that so sure. I know here in the District of Columbia, it feels a little bit safer than it did, you know, but I mean, there's a lot of, you know, people who have revved up people, so people take to the streets. I mean, it's not just, you know, didn't just start today.
No, you're right. And by the way, I love to see the federal government working with local municipalities and states to improve public safety. But going back to the Obama years, he deported 3 million people, Greta, 3 million. But we didn't have these episodes because he did it in a fashion that was effective without raising the temperature and the boiling point. And that's my whole argument right now, is I'm not opposed to upholding the law. I am opposed to doing it in a way that makes us, to the rest of the world, look like an America that nobody recognizes, including a lot of us citizens right now. And this is sickening. And for a Minnesotan, Greta, you know, a beautiful community that has been just ripped apart. I'm not blaming anyone in particular, but we need a president right now who can try to heal this country, acknowledge the realities of a country deeply divided, and not bring us to the precipice. What I'm deeply concerned about is a real risk of civil unrest in a way that none of us want to see.
I think that we have to look at the difference, is that, you know, President Obama, when he deported those 3 million peacefully, he didn't have the problem that the borders were open for 4 years, and we had so many people pour in, and people are, the border has literally been open. And, you know, and I guess it was almost inevitable that we'd get to this, but in an effort to sort of try to rectify that, rightly or wrongfully, how the Trump administration is doing, it's a different situation than what Obama had.
It's a different situation, Greta, but the tactic doesn't have to be different. Look, I think you know me, and hopefully the viewers do too. I want to see the law upheld. I don't want to have open borders and illegal, non-citizens who are running around in the streets, whether they be law-abiding or not. I think the rule of law is important, but there's a way to do it that I think is ethical, appropriate, and more effective. And I'm just going to say this. It's very difficult to see federal uniformed agents like we're seeing right now on the screen in my home community. I don't recognize it anymore, Greta. And I think anybody watching right now would be heartbroken to see what is going on in our country. All I'm saying is we can do this without sending in 2,000 troops and having in this case, Christie Nome showboat in front of the whole country. That's not the way to do this.
But, I mean, I'm not defending what happened today, and it's one person who fired a gun. You know, I don't want to indict all of ICE and all law enforcement. It's just one person
I feel bad for them too.
Who did this. And you know, we have to get to the facts to see whether or not it was, if it was a risk of life. I want to see all the videos and everything. But on the other hand is that the states weren't doing it. You know, I agree with you. I don't want to see federal people in here. But here in the District of Columbia, you know, we had such a problem here in the District of Columbia. I didn't want to see the National Guard here, but finally it got to the point where actually we did need the National Guard here because it was so dangerous. I'd walk outside of my building, and there is not unusual to see a dead person on the street, not from a gunshot or wound, but someone.
And you know,
for
I
other
lived
reasons.
in Washington. I lived in Washington. I saw a couple of my colleagues be assaulted. I saw the same misery that you did. I'm not opposed to cooperation of the federal government with municipalities, especially when there's a public safety issue. But all I'm saying, Greta, is this is causing a public safety issue. And it's not going to be the last time this happens. And it's deeply, deeply destroying this country right now. We can uphold the law effectively without sending in what looks like the de facto military of the United States of America, pouring gasoline on a fire that should never have become as large as it is. And I just want to see this president, that's all, Greta, I just want to see this president take some steps to bring us a little bit together rather than deeply, deeply dividing us. And all that is doing right now is making misery for a lot of America, and it's going to get worse unless we take down the temperature. I feel terrible for the ICE agents who are put in harm's way, and I feel terrible for innocent bystanders that will be killed or hurt because of the immense presence of uniformed federal agents in communities around the country. It's really disconcerting. That's my only point.
I'm going to take the last word on it, and I would say that, you know, right now I tip my hat to the people of Minnesota because it doesn't look like they've risen up, and, you know, right now it's like, you know, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 24 hours, but, you know, there is, you know, I don't see cars on fire, I don't see anything like that. And obviously it's been disrupted the community, but I think the political leaders on both sides of the aisle, if Minnesota continues to be quiet tonight, I think the people of Minnesota may be teaching everybody else in Washington and politicians, you know, how to respond to this stuff. But we'll see what happens. Anyway, sir, nice to see you.
Always good to see you too, Greta. Keep the faith. Thank you.
Thank you. Coming up, a ghost ship caught by the United States. Russia says it is piracy. I'll tell you what happened when the record continues.
Federal agencies urge every family to have an emergency radio. During any disaster, electrical power may get cut. The emergency radio gives you the vital information you need. Newsmax wants you to have the Dynamo Emergency Band Radio. It doesn't need batteries and works in any emergencies. It retails for $30. You can get it with the free offer. Call or go online and get the emergency radio today. Your life may depend on it.
This smart home is going to the Hoying family so they can live an independent life with their catastrophic injuries.
The whole house is just set up in a perfect way. All the normal complications of being in a chair. This place is a huge load off for that. The things that Tunnel to Towers Foundation has done is just a lot more than you would ever expect to get in your entire life.
Join us in supporting our nation's heroes and their families. It only takes $11 a month. Go to T2T.org now.
My heart has experienced life-changing wins, losses, and countless miles. To keep living at my speed, I trust Cunol CoQ10. CoQ10 is the #1 cardiologist-recommended supplement for heart health. Cunol, the brand I trust.
I'm Eric, and I'm a pilot. When I'm congested, I can't breathe, I can't sleep. But I can't tell my passengers I can't fly today. That's why I Navage. I've tried nasal sprays, but with Navage, I have the power to remove congestion fast by flushing out germs, mucus, bacteria, and viruses through powered suction in like 30 seconds. I can see the results. I can feel the results.
This cold season, get #1 doctor-recommended Navage, available online and in store.
Affordable dentures and implants just got even more affordable.
I saw you strolling down the lane.
Schedule your free consultation at affordabledentures.com or call 1-800-DENTURE today.
Today, the United States tried to assert more control over Venezuela. National Security Correspondent Carla Babb has the latest. Carla.
Hi, Greta. Yes, 2 pre-dawn operations this morning within hours of each other by the military and the Coast Guard. The U.S. seizing the oil tanker Marinera, previously known as the Bella 1 and better known, more commonly known as the Bella 1, in the northern Atlantic after weeks of pursuit, and a Ghost Fleet tanker Sophia apprehended in the Caribbean without incident. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem posting the news on X and warning, quote, The world's criminals are on notice. You can run, but you can't hide. U.S. Coast Guard now escorting the Sophia to the U.S. for final disposition. A U.S. official telling me it was sanctioned for its role in smuggling illicit oil and was flying a false flag at the time of the intercept. The U.S. also boarding and seizing the Bella One this morning in the northern Atlantic. The ship running from the Coast Guard for weeks, changing its flag, painting a new name on the hull, which Nome called a desperate and failed attempt to escape justice. The crew of the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Monroe pursued the vessel across the high seas and through treacherous storms. Officials had sanctioned this tanker for trafficking illicit oil that helps fund Iranian and Iran-backed terror groups. The Bella One made a U-turn, if you can remember, Greta, on its way to Venezuela last month and headed northeast into the Atlantic Ocean, sending out dozens of distress signals as it was pursued by the Coast Guard. Officials say the Coast Guard realized it needed more manpower and decided to move in a maritime special response team in place to help. Russia is now calling the seizure in the northern Atlantic an act of piracy. But get this, Greta, according to Kepler, a tanker tracking firm, the tanker loaded crude oil in Iran in early September and then turned off its transponder near the Strait of Hormuz for about 2 months. When it came back online in the same spot, it no longer had any oil. So Kepler says that suggests it likely illegally transferred oil to other vessels. And now Secretary of State Marco Rubio is saying today the U.S. will use sanctioned oil in Venezuela as part of its stabilization plan following the capture of Venezuelan strongman Nicolas Maduro. Let's listen.
We are in the midst right now and, in fact, about to execute on a deal to take all the oil. They have oil that is stuck in Venezuela. They can't move it because of our quarantine and because it's sanctioned. We are going to take between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil. We're going to sell it in the marketplace at market rates, not at the discounts Venezuela was getting. That money will then be handled in such a way that we will control how it is dispersed in a way that benefits the Venezuelan people, not corruption, not the regime.
So, Greta, now that marks 4 sanctioned tankers that the U.S. has taken over: the Skipper on December 10th, the Centuries on December 20th, and the 2 today.
Do you get from what Secretary of State Marco Rubio just said, that the 30 to 50 million barrels, that all the proceeds from that is going to go back to Venezuela, just the United States is going to decide how to distribute it back, that we're not taking any of it?
That's unclear. I mean, hopefully we will get more details on that in the coming days. But what we know is, if you continue to take these sanctioned oil tankers, the big ones like the Bella One or like the Sophia Seas, they can have 2 million barrels of oil on them. The Bella One was empty, but the others were not. So that's a factor. And then there's also oil sitting in Venezuela, waiting to be taken out by tankers that are also sanctioned. I've had an official tell me there were at least 24 sanctioned oil tankers in and around Venezuela. Other monitoring groups have said that there could be 30 in there. So there is a lot of tankers that can be looked at that are sanctioned that the U.S. can take control of.
Well, I want to know, maybe I can find out from you tomorrow, these shadow tankers, is that, who is selling them to this so-called shadow fleet? Somebody's up to his eyeballs in selling shadow tankers. Anyway, Carla Babb, nice to see you. And today, the White House held its first briefing since the operation to capture Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt also faced questions about Greenland. White House correspondent Mike Carter joins me. Mike?
Yeah, and following up on Carla's story there, Greta, we heard from Energy Secretary Chris Wright today, who says the U.S. will now control sanctioned oil out of Venezuela indefinitely as it prepares to roll back restrictions on crude oil from that country in the global markets. Caroline Leavitt also saying today about Venezuela, when it comes to troops on the ground, which there are currently none, that the president does reserve the right to put troops on the ground to protect American interests and American workers in the oil and energy factors. When it comes to Greenland, the U.S. taking over Greenland, perhaps, well, whether by buying it, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio has stated, or militarily, Leavitt had this to say today.
The president has been very open and clear with all of you and with the world that he views it in the best interest of the United States to deter Russian and Chinese aggression in the Arctic region. And so that's why his team is currently talking about what a potential purchase would look like. All options are always on the table for President Trump as he examines what's in the best interest of the United States. But I will just say that the president's first option always has been diplomacy.
Well, President Trump on Tuesday said he wants to see Republicans own the health care issue ahead of this year's midterms. With a vote on expired Obamacare subsidies expected this week, Trump says Republicans should be flexible on traditional abortion restrictions stemming from the Hyde Amendment. That is a legislative provision enacted annually since the 1970s that bans federal funding for most abortions.
Now, you have to be a little flexible on Hyde. You know that. You got to be a little flexible. You got to work something. You got to use ingenuity. You got to work.
Well, a year ago, Trump submitted an executive order to enforce the Hyde Amendment after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, stating it is the policy of the U.S., consistent with the Hyde Amendment, to end the forced use of federal taxpayer dollars to fund or promote elective abortion. Well, pro-life groups like the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America are very upset over the president's turnaround on this, saying President Trump and said Republicans should be flexible on the Hyde Amendment. That's not what voters sent a GOP trifecta to Washington to do. Hyde has saved over 2.6 million lives, and the majority of Americans oppose taxpayer-funded abortion. Today, I asked Caroline Levitt to clarify the president's remarks on the Hyde Amendment.
The president did not change the administration's policy. It was President Trump who signed an executive order protecting the Hyde Amendment. It's the Trump administration that has taken multiple actions on various fronts to ensure that taxpayer dollars are not funding the practice of abortion. What the president was saying yesterday was Republicans, and frankly Democrats too, need to show a little bit more flexibility so we can actually get something done with respect to the issue of health care.
And today, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, RFK Jr., the HHS Secretary, issuing new dietary guidelines for Americans from 2025 through 2030. RFK Jr. suggesting Americans should choose whole food items, thinking meats and avocados, and do away with much of those processed foods and many of the carbohydrates. The Trump administration believes, Greta, with more than half of U.S. adults facing a diet-related chronic disease, this is a needed guideline change. It will affect things from public schools, the U.S. military, the VA, and those guidelines will be implemented over the next year to 2 years.
Mike Carter at the White House. Thank you. Coming up, a journalist who was born in Venezuela and for a few years lived under Nicolas Maduro's dictatorship joins me. That when the record continues.
O'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Total Beets, America's best-selling Beets brand, is available at Walmart. Total Beets Blood Pressure Support Soft Chews contain a key ingredient clinically shown to deliver 2 times better blood pressure support. Take control of your health. Head to Walmart and get Total Beets Blood Pressure Support Soft Chews today.
With less pain and swelling from active psoriatic arthritis, imagine being a million miles away. With Tremfya, less joint pain, stiffness, and swelling is possible. Some patients even felt less fatigued. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections and liver problems may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Imagine being a million miles away. Ask your doctor about Tremfya.
Since leaving the gold standard, the U.S. dollar has lost almost 90% of its value. Meanwhile, global central banks are buying up gold at unprecedented rates. Join the many Americans who are returning to gold to store their wealth. That's why we've created the ultimate gold buying guide, and we'll ship it right to your door free of charge. Call Texas Bullion Exchange today or visit gettexasgold.com for your free gold buying guide while supplies last.
President Trump promised to put America first, and his word is as good as gold. Trump delivered a secure border, unleashed American energy, and provided the largest tax cut in American history. Now Trump has delivered again by rescheduling cannabis, which was classified as more dangerous than fentanyl. Trump's action will destroy the cartel's illicit black market expand medical research, and ensure seniors and veterans safely receive the care they need. Thank President Trump for delivering on another America First promise.
When Betty and George switched to consumer cellular, it saved them a lot. So they started splurging on date night. No, don't you dare. It's an acquired taste. Right now, get your second month free. Call Consumer Cellular.
There are only a few men I'd trust with my life. Two of them built this wallet. I've known the guys behind Proof for nearly 20 years, and we've been through hell and back together. When they told me they were building the wallet, I just said, bill me now, I'm in. This isn't some fashion piece. This isn't just some trend. These wallets are a direct reflection of the kind of men who built it. It's built to last, built to function, and designed to carry everything you need and more. If anything happens to it, they'll take care of it. No questions, no fine print. If you knew the guys who created this wallet, you wouldn't carry anything else. Go check them out, because they built this thing right.
What if getting older didn't mean living with joint discomfort, brain fog, or low energy? Qualia Senolytic is the only all-in-one clinically tested formula with 9 ingredients designed to help your body clear aging cells. Taken just 2 days a month, this regimen works at the cellular level to rejuvenate energy and support longevity, helping you stay active and energized. With Qualia Senolytic, life truly gets better with age. Start today at qualialife.com/TV.
Today, the United States seized 2 oil tankers linked to Venezuela. One of the oil tankers is a Russian-flagged vessel, and the seizure occurred in the Atlantic Ocean near Iceland. The oil tanker has been playing a bit of a cat-and-mouse game with the United States. It began about December 21st when the now seized oil tanker evaded a U.S. blockade. The second oil tanker was seized in the Caribbean. Republican Texas Congressman and member of the House Intelligence Committee, Dan Crenshaw, joins me. Good afternoon, sir. And where is this going to lead? I mean, Russia calls it piracy of the tanker we seized near Iceland. But what do you foresee is going to happen?
Well, we've seized it. We're going to take it. And we're going to keep seizing cargo ships that are sanctioned with legal court-ordered warrants on them. Look, I mean, we've had sanctions forever on this stuff, but sanctions without seizures, well, those are just suggestions. It's not enforcement. The Trump administration is very clearly set some red lines and wants to keep its leverage over the interim Venezuelan government. And you only keep that leverage if you continue to ensure that they understand that we are very serious. The Venezuelan government cannot operate if we continue this embargo on its shadow fleet, so we actually do have to keep enforcing what we say we're going to enforce. So this does become this sort of geopolitical chess game. That's why the Russians were actually willing to send assets to try and save the ship, because now maybe there's something on that ship that we don't know about. I certainly actually do not know that information right now. But it is also likely that it's just a ship, and it really is just a thing that has to be won by each side in order to prove to everyone else that they're the stronger power. Of course, we're America, we won again. So happy to see these actions by the Trump administration.
You mentioned the shadow fleet. There seems to be quite a market for this shadow fleet, these huge oil tankers out there. I suspect that they're not in the best shape, because they're usually sort of second or third or fourth hand that are floating around there. But certainly, who's ever wheeling and dealing in a shadow fleet must know that it's an effort to evade sanctions and to evade other things as well. Is there any effort to investigate who's selling these shadow fleet oil tankers?
Yeah, I heard you mention that before. It's earlier in your remarks. It's a good question. I'm not an expert on how maritime sales go, but it's certainly a question worth investigating. My intuition, though, is that these are often sold as legitimate tankers and then resold on the black market as illegitimate tankers. I mean, to become illegitimate is simply a matter of what's painted on the side and what kind of flag it's using and to what purposes it's being used for. So, something can be legitimate and become illegitimate the next day.
Well, it certainly seems like someone has a guilty conscience if they change the flag and paint a new name on it as the U.S. is in hot pursuit. It certainly seems like somebody's up to no good.
Yeah. Oh, of course. And that's something that just proved our point. Now, this had already been sanctioned a year before anyway, so we've been following this for a while.
All right, turning now to Venezuela. How much involvement or lack of involvement would you recommend the president have going forward? We have right now the former vice president is now the president. But what would be your advice to the president?
Our president, our president or the Venezuelan president? I assume you mean ours. I think they're on the right track. I think this is really a Department of State mission at the moment. It's a diplomatic mission, and we're telling them, look, we have all the leverage over you. You cannot liquefy your assets. You cannot get money into your economy unless we let you, because of the embargo. Again, this is why it's so important for us to actually enforce those sanctioned ships, which we are doing, and why we're making that deal today to transport 30 to 50 billion barrels of oil to the U.S. And then come up with a deal on those proceeds. So the goal in the immediate term is to work with these people that we really don't like. We don't like them. They are communists through and through. But we are being practical. And to the extent that they don't want to be practical, again, these Venezuelan communists, that they don't want to move down this path, and this path should end up in free and fair elections. That is the ultimate goal. But we want to stabilize the country first. We want to make sure that moving toward that goal is done responsibly. And to the extent that they want to veer away from it, I think they now know that we are willing to take action. And so this really is a diplomatic effort moving forward, with the military standing by should it need to be.
But there's time on our side, because right now they have a broken economy. I mean, the economy in Venezuela is just in shambles. It has an inflation rate of over 500% or something outrageous like that, compared to our less than 3%. They can't bring oil online right away because the refineries that they have are so degraded, because no one's been able to work with them forever. So in order to get Venezuela sort of up and running, it is going to take years.
Yeah, it will. It'll take investment. I bet there's a lot of oil companies, like as the president has mentioned, a lot of our oil companies chomping at the bit to get after it and do that investment. Now, it does take years. Now, 30 to 50 billion barrels is not nothing. That's pretty significant, and it should be known that American refineries are actually designed around oil like Venezuela's oil, that thick crude, heavy crude. So that's why this deal makes a lot of sense for both the U.S. and Venezuela if they want to survive, and why I think we haven't seen details of it yet. We've just got the generalities of it, but we're 72 hours in, not bad that we're already making those kind of deals.
Congressman Dan Crenshaw, thank you, sir.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
I think it's safe to say former Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido is not a fan of interim Venezuelan President Delcy Rodriguez. Here's what Guaido said when asked about Rodriguez being sworn in as Venezuela's interim president.
The U.S. president is clear. Delcy is an acting dictator, and she's the head of the cartel of the Solis. Also, President Trump has said that if she doesn't cooperate with the United States, she will meet the same fate as Nicolas Maduro, jail or worse. Trump and Rubio have said this in no uncertain terms. We know who Delcy Rodriguez is, who her brother is, and the market knows. The oil industry does not have confidence in her.
Venezuelan-born journalist Maria Alesia Sosa joins me. Nice to talk to you. And tell me, first of all, you grew up in Venezuela, right?
Hi, Greta. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I was born and raised, and I left the country when I was 30 years old. So most of my life was in Venezuela. So I'm pretty familiar with the situation. My family also lives there, and I have many friends down there still.
Have you made phone calls back to Venezuela, or was in the last 3 or 4 days since Maduro was picked up by the U.S.?
Of course, I'm in constant communication with them, and let me put it this way: we Venezuela, we are the hostage, the beaten kids inside a home by an aggressor. And after years of yelling to the neighbors, of screaming for help, of sending SOS signals to the world, finally, someone was brave enough and found the legal ground to enter that home, and remove the aggressor. So Venezuelans on Saturday woke up filled with joy and hope, because this opens up the opportunity, the chance for a transition, even though we know the job is far from being done, just because this dictatorship is a three-head monster, if you will. But we are confident that this is a great opportunity for change.
You know, I text once in a while with people from Venezuela, coincidentally, and I hear horror stories about the inflation and the poverty. Can you give me some sort of sense of, I've also been down to the border where they were making items on the Colombia side out of Venezuelan currency. It was so worthless. Can you give me some sort of idea of what it's like for many people in Venezuela?
I mean, just so you have an idea, teachers' monthly salary is $20 or between $20 and $30 a month. A pension for a 70-year-old is $3. The Venezuelan regime has killed, persecuted, tortured anyone who thinks differently. They established the state of terror, seizing every institution in the country. They shut down, they stolen, they bought all the media outlets for journalists like me. That's why I had to leave the country, because I was not loyal to their system. They also destroyed the agriculture, the oil industry. So that is why we have that terrible economy. They stole billions of dollars and murdered students during protests. This is why we are suffering from this collective and national trauma. And that is why since Saturday we have this new hope after Maduro was taken out. But as you know, Congressman Crenshaw was saying before, they don't like the guys that are down there, because Delcy Rodriguez, I have to say, she's not a moderate, as the New York Times a few weeks ago portrayed. There is also a lot of uncertainty. There is hope, there is joy, but there's uncertainty, because Delcy Rodriguez, she has been sanctioned by the U.S. also for her criminal record under the vice president. She's been in charge of many of the human rights violations and tortures, along with Maduro. But what gives me a bit of confidence, and what people think down in the street, and I've been talking to many of them, is that Secretary Rubio is well aware of this. And she knows the Rodriguez siblings very well. He, in a personal level, when he was senator and now as Secretary of State, has been so close to the Venezuelan situation. So people are kind of trusting the process and hoping the Delcy Rodriguez mandate is temporary until we can have fair elections. And when that happens, hopefully and eventually, the majority of the country will for sure choose again Maria Corina Machado, our Nobel Peace Prize, that won by a landslide the elections, through Edmundo Gonzalez in 2024.
Why when Maduro was picked up, when he was arrested by the United States, why did he have Cuban guards? And I realize the relationship between Venezuela and Cuba, but the people that were closest to him were Cubans and not Venezuelan military. At least that's how it's reported. I mean, I would think you'd trust your own people more than you would even a friendly country.
Greta, that's a great question. People talk about the oil and that the Americans will take our oil, and people are outraged. And our oil was taken from us a long time ago when Chavez was president, and later his successor Maduro. So the Chavismo destroyed the oil industry and managed to control the population and threaten whoever was not loyal to the party. Under this regime, Venezuela gave oil for free or in exchange to security, intelligence, weapons to countries like Cuba, Russia, Iran, and China. So this is just one part or one example of how the regime was making business with these devil countries, enemies of the United States, so close to the United States. Let me remind you that Venezuela is a 2.5-hour flight from Florida, Caracas, the capital. So this is why, in a sense, and this administration has been clear on that Venezuela the regime in Venezuela represents a great threat to the United States. And quite frankly, we rather have the U.S. as a partner doing fair business with our oil than continue being a colony for authoritarian regimes that take our oil in exchange for those tools who torture, those tools to torture our population and our people.
Maria Alesia, thank you very much, Sosa, for joining me. I hope you come back, because my favorite guests are the ones who have real experience, who've been there. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Coming up, our outrage of the day when the record continues.
Newsmax.
Shoots it straight. No talking down to me.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think. Don't tell me how to think.
I trust Newsmax. Newsmax.
They don't tell me how to think. They let me decide.
Real news for real people.
Don't let hackers start the new year with your money. Cyber criminals are targeting your savings and identity and your personal information. Respond with Guardio. Guardio is a security tool that stops fake sites in real time, flags malicious emails, and blocks phishing links, helping you outsmart modern threats and stay in control of your online security. Run a free scan to see if your information is already exposed by going to Guardio.com now.
Our wedding was a blast. However, the feeling of the credit card debt that came after was not very fun.
If you have credit card, personal loan, or medical debt, J.G. Wentworth's Debt Relief Program can help reduce what you owe by up to 45% before fees in as little as 24 months.
Without J.G. Wentworth, we would still be paying off our credit card debt.
If your debt is more than $10,000, you're not alone. Visit jgwentworth.com to learn how we can help you find a path to debt relief.
As a neurologist, my patients are often concerned with age-related memory decline. I recommend Cunol Brain Health with 2 powerful, high-absorption ingredients clinically shown to improve memory, focus, attention, and more. Cunol, the brand I trust.
If you're on supplemental oxygen, heavy and awkward tanks can be a burden. Now you can leave home and leave the tanks behind with Inogen, portable oxygen therapy that moves with you.
With my Inogen, now I'm able to do the things that I've always loved. I just press the button here, and there's my oxygen. This little box changed my life. I can now do all those things that I want to do.
The Inogen creates portable oxygen from the air around you. When you have an Inogen, live life on the go.
I love this. And I love my Inogen because it lets me see this.
Inogen systems are so small and light, you're free to leave the house without the hassles of an oxygen tank.
I could play golf again. I could go grocery shopping. I'm free again.
With the Inogen, I can handle my own oxygen. I can carry my own oxygen. I go anywhere with this. Look how small it is.
And right now, you can try an Inogen portable oxygen system for 30 days risk-free. Give us a call right now. We'll answer all your questions. We'll send you an information guide, and if you qualify, we'll send you an Inogen system to use for 30 days risk-free.
I took a 10-day, 3,000-mile road trip with my trusty Inogen. I always call it my trusty Inogen. I do trust it.
This gives me the oxygen that the doctor prescribed for me.
You can continue to drag heavy and awkward oxygen tanks when you leave the house, or use the latest in medical technology to get the oxygen your doctor prescribed anytime you leave home. So give us a call. Try an Inogen system of your very own for 30 days, risk-free. Your insurance may even cover your new Inogen system.
If you're on oxygen, you need to be using an Inogen.
This Inogen really works. You got to get off the couch and get one.
Wouldn't you rather have this than a tank? Really?
Pick up the phone, call the Inogen company. They're going to take care of you.
Call 1-800-606-1546 or visit Inogen.com.
Since Nicolas Maduro was ousted Saturday, has there been any change, and what is the impact on neighboring Colombia? Foreign correspondent Chuck Holton is in Bogota, which is the capital of Colombia. Chuck?
That's right, Greta. You know, President Trump has said some kind of unflattering things about the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, and Petro has really taken offense to that. So he called for nationwide protests today to protest against President Trump. Now, here in Bogota, this is friendly territory for Gustavo Petro, without a doubt. And you can see here, there's probably a couple thousand people here getting ready to listen to President Petro speak. Look, President Petro is a lame duck. He's not going to be serving for more than just another few months, and he cannot run for re-election. He has been sort of menacing or threatening President Trump and, you know, just saying, if you want me, come get me. I'm here. I'm ready for you, that sort of thing. Well, if President Trump really wanted President Petro, he just needs to wait a few months until he's not president anymore, because President Petro is not very popular across Colombia. Sorry, it's been a long day. And his approval ratings are in the low 30s. he's really looking to use this as a way to sort of bolster his support on the way out the door. But in a few months, it's very likely that there will be a new president that's much further to the right than Gustavo Petro. And at that point, President Trump could probably ask the new Colombian president just to, extradite him to the United States if he really wanted to get him. Greta?
Chuck, tell me, are Venezuelans flowing into it? I know you're down in Cucuta on the border yesterday, but are Venezuelans still flowing into Colombia, or has that slowed down?
No, it's wide open back and forth because Gustavo Petro is almost as communist as the people in Venezuela. They've had that border wide open for the last 4 years. So the people are coming across to shop, they're going back, but it's more economic than it is fleeing or going, one way or the other. Now, here it's interesting to see because he's called together all of the people who really support him. And we've had a chance to talk to some of those people. And what they don't tell you, they don't talk about is the fact that the United States has provided virtually more than half of the military hardware that Colombia uses in its military. Up until just recently, the United States did all of the maintenance on all of the Colombian Air Force helicopters and planes and things like that. We gave more than $12 billion to Colombia in aid. And that is all it's gone by the wayside now because of this tiff between President Trump and President Petro.
And the influence of the cartels in Colombia is what now? I know it was really influential before, but what's it like now?
That's right. About 80% of the entire economy in Colombia at one point was due to cartel activity. Now, it's not all cocaine. The cartels actually make more money in illegal gold mining in Colombia than they do, about $4 billion a year. And I've done some serious reporting on that in the past. So it's not just the cartels growing and moving cocaine, although that's big. They also are doing human trafficking, drug trafficking, and gold. I would call it blood gold, so to speak. And so it is a huge factor in the economy here. And of course, Gustavo Petro himself was guerrilla back in the 1970s.
Chuck, thank you.
My pleasure.
And the most notorious CIA officer convicted of spying on the United States for the Soviet Union has died. Aldrich Ames died Monday in a Maryland federal prison. Ames was serving a life sentence for espionage. He is believed to have compromised more than 100 intelligence operations. He also gave the Soviets names of Russian agents who were working for the CIA. The Defense Department, now the War Department, says at least 9 of those Soviet agents working for the United States were then executed. In return for being a traitor to the United States, Ames received money, and lots of it. It's estimated he received about $2.5 million from the Soviet Union. Ames was born in River Falls, Wisconsin. He was 84 years old when he died in prison. And it's time for our outrage of the day. A Connecticut police chief has retired after admitting to stealing money from a city fund. On Monday, New Haven Police Chief Carl Jacobson confessed to stealing from a fund meant to compensate confidential informants. Those informants helped cops solve crimes. Jacobson used the stolen money for personal expenses. Jacobson was the city's police chief for more than 3 years. He admitted to the theft after deputies confronted him with irregularities in the fund. The amount Jacobson stole and the duration of his scheme has not been disclosed, but it's safe to say it is pretty outrageous that the police chief is a thief. Coming up, a major update in the case against Nick Reiner, son of Carl Reiner. That when the record continues.
You woke up with a sore throat and a low-grade fever. You know you are getting sick, so here's your choices. You can get sicker and miss work. Try to see a doctor this week or sit hours in a crowded waiting room at urgent care.
I have a smarter option for you. Open your medical emergency kit. Match your symptoms to doctor-recommended prescription in your booklet and take the right meds now and get well faster.
This is not a first aid kit. It's like having an urgent care in your home. It includes doctor-prescribed medications to treat over 39 medical issues like respiratory infections, strep throat, pneumonia, UTIs, and more.
No waiting to see the doctor and no standing in line at the pharmacy. It's right here.
Every home should have at least one medical emergency kit, and here's how to order.
Order online and save $45. Your kit to treat dozens of common and serious illnesses is rushed to your door. Visit urgentcarekit.com/news, promo code NEWS. That's urgentcarekit.com/news, promo code NEWS.
At Viasat, we believe every family deserves connection. Satellite internet that's fast, reliable, and installed by professionals. For work, for play, for every day. Internet plans made easy and affordable. Available anywhere you call home. Visit getviasat.com or call 877-VIASAT-7 to sign up today. That's getviasat.com or 877-842-7287. Viasat, internet without limits.
I'm Elmer Heinrich, the 91-year-old formulator of Immuno 150, an incredible nutritional supplement. There's nothing like it. Now, Immuno 150 is different because it contains 70 plant-derived minerals and 80 other nutrients. Dr. Linus Pauling, known for vitamin C, was instrumental in convincing me to get into the mineral business in 1983. He said the world is sick due to a lack of minerals in topsoil. He said the body needs 60 minerals, but the average food and supplement has no more than 12. That's the reason for Immuno 150. Since its inception, it's had a powerful impact on the lives of thousands of people who could not get any help from various supplements they took or their doctor. Now, I suggest you try Immuno 150 to see what 70 minerals, CoQ10, and 80 nutrients can do for you. Look at the videos on our website. Millions have. Now, consider placing an order for Immuno 150 online or call our toll-free number. I know you'll be glad you did.
Every day, bumps and bangs happen. Bruises are optional. Used daily, dermatologist-recommended Dermend Moisturizing Bruise Cream can help restore your skin's natural barrier and reduce the appearance of bruises. If you have mature skin and bruise easily, get Dermend Moisturizing Bruise Cream in the first aid aisle and get back to having way too much fun.
We have a major update in the Nick Reiner case. He's charged with, of course, killing his parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner. Today he appeared in Los Angeles Superior Court to be arraigned for the murder of his parents, but the judge postponed Reiner's arraignment. Why? Because his lawyer called it quits. His lawyer, Alan Jackson, asked the judge for permission to withdraw from representing him and the appointment of a public defender. Jackson said he cannot disclose why he stepped down, but he did say Reiner is innocent. Judge Teresa McGonigal granted the request. She rescheduled Reiner's arraignment for February 23rd. Reiner's accused, as noted, of murdering his parents, actor and filmmaker Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner. If convicted, Reiner faces a possibility of life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. The elder son of former President Ronald Reagan and Newsmax analyst Michael Reagan has died. According to his family, Reagan died of cancer on Sunday in Los Angeles. Yesterday, his father's foundation announced his death. The foundation posted in part, quote, Michael Reagan lived a life shaped by conviction, purpose, and an abiding devotion to President Reagan's ideals, end quote. Newsmax CEO Chris Ruddy also released a statement after Reagan's death. It reads in part, quote, Michael Reagan was far more than a political commentator. He was the living embodiment of his father's legacy, and throughout his life, he worked tirelessly to carry forward Ronald Reagan's torch for freedom, family, and faith, end quote. Michael Reagan was 80 years old. We'll be right back.
You hear the same voices.
Donald Trump knows that's a lie.
From the same people.
Donald Trump is less lucid.
Saying the same thing.
Insults, invective, and outright lies.
And you say, enough! I'm Chris Salcedo, and I'll tell you the real news. You don't believe me? Just tune in.
My body is my livelihood. Staying active, a good diet, and the right supplements, that is essential as a fighter. So I take it serious. It all starts with the right fuel. Balance of nature just makes sense. Whole fruit and vegetable ingredients, simple. I am CP the champ. Balance of nature fits perfectly into my routine. It's basically a no-brainer.
Lock in 50% off for 1 year.
A new year brings new threats, and Cyberman's ready for every one of them. While hackers plot their next move, Cyberman's already there, protecting families, businesses, and governments before danger can strike. This year, protect what matters most with easy-to-use award-winning protection. With PC-Matic, you get American-made protection that's faster, smarter, and stronger. Start 2026 with confidence. Visit PCMatic.com today.
Nearly home. Whodunit?
We're looking for a house closer to everything, but we don't know where to start.
Find it with Realtor.com. With Real Commute, it's easy to find a home closer to what's ever close to your heart. Do y'all recycle? Realtor.com.
A mesothelioma diagnosis is overwhelming, but you don't have to go through it alone. Our firm is exclusively dedicated to only serving mesothelioma victims and their families. With decades of success, our team of nurses and attorneys will fight for the compensation and care you deserve. We'll even come to you. This is our MesoCare promise. Call us now so you can focus on what matters most.
Call now and we'll come to you for a free consultation. Call 800-600-3850 or go to mesobook.com.
Muscle cramps were keeping me up at night, so then I tried Slowmag, the magnesium plus calcium supplement that helps relax tense muscles so I can rest comfortably. And Slowmag tablets have a slow-release formula that's gentle on my stomach. That's why I use Slowmag.
Affordable dentures and implants just got even more affordable.
I saw you strolling down the lane.
Schedule your free consultation at affordabledentures.com or call 1-800-DENTURE today.
Set sail toward fast asthma relief with Breathora.
$300 for a refill?
Don't pay that. Use Single Care. Look up your prescription, show the coupon to the pharmacist, and save.
See why more people are saving with Single Care.
Anybody who's struggling with alcohol should try Or Health. Within a week, the cravings were completely gone. Or Health is safe, science-backed, and it works. I couldn't believe how easy it was. Alcohol doesn't run my life anymore.
Text Newsmax to 710-710 to learn more.
Find out if you're getting pulled under on your car insurance at smarterauto.com. In under 2 minutes, we compare over 90 auto insurance carriers so you know if you're overpaying. Find out if you're paying more than you should on car insurance. Shop smarter at smarterauto.com.
Buying a new car? You need WeatherTech. Perhaps a nice used car? You need WeatherTech. Or maybe you're still driving Old Faithful. You need WeatherTech. No matter the age of your vehicle, American-made WeatherTech products are the solution. Because messes don't care what year your vehicle is. See? You do need WeatherTech. Order your American-made protection at WT.com.
As we've been following this hour, earlier today, a woman was shot and killed by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune says the woman has now been identified as 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good. DHS says the agent was acting in self-defense and that the woman was trying to run over the agent with her car. The mayor of Minneapolis called it reckless. The mayor has called on ICE to get out of his city. Newsmax will be on top of this story throughout the rest of the day and the evening, so stay with Newsmax. Chris Salcedo's show is up next.